Hello guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be previewing the highly anticipated Colorado Avalanche versus Edmonton Oilers Western Conference Final. Now I know what you may be thinking, Grav, how the heck did this one team make it to the Western Conference Final? And I know, the Avs making it to the third round surprised me too. Let's be real though, unless you were me, you probably expected the Avs to be in this position. On the other hand, the Edmonton Oilers, after beating the LA Kings and shocking the world, beating the Flames in 5, are going on to the Western Conference Finals. And this battle, McKinnon versus McDavid, Makar, Leon Draisaitl, and so much other talent is going to be amazing. But which team wins this battle? Not the Battle of Alberta, but the Battle of the West, and which team comes out on top? Oilers or Avs? Watch for the whole preview as we got all the breakdowns on everything for this series that you need to know about, and make sure you hit that subscribe button to the Sportsnet YouTube channel for the best sports coverage around. And without further ado, let's get into this crazy matchup. Now, I have good news for everybody that loved the high offensive, high octane games that we saw in the Battle of Alberta. I don't see that stopping anytime soon, and the stats check that out as well. When it comes to NHL playoff teams, Edmonton is first in terms of goals scored per game across the entire playoffs, with a 4.33 goals scored per game rate. As for the Avs, they're just right behind Edmonton at 4.30, second among all NHL teams. And again, looking at the goaltending, looking at the defense, and especially the defensive issues and injuries that the Avs have had, I think for both sides, we're going to see a lot of 5-4, 5-3, 6-4 games. It's going to be amazing. And when we look at the forward lineups for both of these teams, it's pretty interesting because the Oilers, I would say, probably have the top 6 advantage. That Kane, McDavid, and Draisaitl line was ridiculous, and we saw a lot of hype going to McDavid in that second round, but Draisaitl was absolutely elite almost every single game while also playing injured, which is miraculous. And you also got that second line of Hyman, Nuge, and Puljujarvi, and a bunch of spread down the lineup with Warren Foegele playing well, McLeod playing fantastic, and some other players on that bottom 6 playing solidly. But for the Avs, they definitely have the momentum in terms of depth. Even though the top 6 might not be as hot right now, you still got so many weapons like McKinnon, Lehkonen, who's on that first line, Nichushkin, who is a little bit cold in that series versus St. Louis, but can arrive at any time, Nazem Kadri, Mikko Rantanen, who also hasn't had that great of a playoffs. I mean, the Avs are second in terms of goals scored, right behind Edmonton, and you have core guys in that top 6 not playing as well as they should. Mikko Rantanen is an especially big subject. He's a guy that throughout these playoffs has kind of looked lackluster, looked a little bit injured, but if he comes up huge, then that Avs team is completely different. But you look at that bottom 6, you got guys like Kemper coming up, you got Burakovsky on that third line, the fourth line of Cogliano, Helm, and Logan O'Connor can grind you down to a pulp. So in my opinion, I give the pretty serious edge forward-wise to Colorado, but again, that's mostly because of the depth. Connor McDavid is Connor McDavid, and Leon Draisaitl has been fantastic, and as long as those two guys are rolling, Edmonton is just fine offensively. But that's just the thing for the Oilers. When we look at the depth of both these teams, I mean, comparing the second line, you got for the Oilers, Hyman, Nuge, and Puljujarvi, which has been great, and Hyman especially has been fantastic, but I do give the edge to Colorado for that Nichushkin, Kadri, and Rantanen mixture, even though they might not be going completely. If they are going to get hot, then that Avs depth, that Avs middle 6 especially, is a lot better than what Edmonton is going to provide. So I think especially to start things off, Edmonton's depth needs to be huge if they're going to have a chance versus the Avs, especially on that power play too. But here's the thing that, again, I think separates Colorado from Edmonton. With the Oilers, a lot of their top end guys are playing about as good as they possibly can. And yes, that series versus Calgary was a big win for them. But at the same time, I look at the Avs and you still have guys like Rantanen at 11 points, a player that, again, hasn't played all too well, but is still being productive. And if he really takes that next step, I think Colorado's offense is going to be in a much better position, again, in all areas. But looking at the defense too, I think both of these teams are likely going to struggle quite a bit. In terms of NHL playoff teams, the Avs are 4th in terms of goals against per game with a 2.70 rate. Not too bad, and again, they play pretty decently versus St. Louis. Darcy, Kemper, which we'll get into a second, was a little bit lackluster. For the Oilers, they were 6th among all NHL playoff teams with a 3.08 rate. Not too bad, and again, there's been some odd defensive woes here or there. Overall, though, the Oilers' defense has been much better than I expected, but by far, the Avs are going to be the biggest test with their top-end talent on both forward and defense. Now, let's go on to the defensive pairs, and personally, for this next series, it's which defense is less bad, I think is what's going to be the case here. With how high-powered both of these teams are, the defenses might struggle a little bit. As for the Avs, their top pairing isn't going to struggle whatsoever, with Devon Toews and Cale Makar leading the way. Offensively, they're going to make the Oilers' neutral zone play extremely difficult, and I think for the Avs, again, for the Oilers, they haven't faced anything like that, any pairing like that whatsoever, so it's going to be a big adjustment to make. But the problem is, after that, you got Jack Johnson in the lineup on that second pairing as of recently, but again, that can change. But Jack Johnson, with the injury of Sam Girard, will likely be in the lineup there. They could maybe have Curtis McDermott, but that is going to be a huge issue for the Avs. I'm just thinking about Connor McDavid facing Jack Johnson, and I know Jack Johnson is the best NHL defenseman, but still, it is Connor McDavid, and he can pull anybody out. And you got Josh Manson as well in that top four. You got Bowen Byram, who's been fantastic as of recently, and you got Eric Johnson there, who has been solid. But again, just thinking about Jack Johnson on that defense makes me worry just a little bit. I mean, the Avs defense was fine versus St. Louis. It got the job done, but against the Oilers, just like Edmonton's defense, both defenses are going to see something that they haven't seen before. And I think for the Avs, they're much more likely to make an adjustment. As I said before, for the Oilers, I think their defense has been supreme, and against Calgary, even though they allowed quite a bit of chances, they were still able to minimize the panic, minimize the pressure, and minimize the leads lost. And in terms of the defense, you got Darnell Nurse and Cody Ceci on that top pair, Duncan Keefe and Evan Bouchard, Brett Kulak and Tyson Barrie. And in my opinion, even though the Oilers defense has exceeded expectations and guys like Ceci have been pretty incredible, at the same time, they still have not faced a player like Nathan McKinnon, a defenseman like Cale Makar, and that type of offense that, when going, could be one of the best in the NHL, if not the best. And to me, when I look at players like Duncan Keefe, and even if he has had some good moments and still looks slow, they might get slaughtered here on defense. And I think guys like Nathan McKinnon, if they have that extra edge, are going to have fantastic series. Now, we've gone through the forward groups, we've gone through the defense, we've gone through statistics and everything so far, but now let's move on to the most interesting, and let's be honest, probably the most chaotic part of this upcoming series, in the goaltending. Mike Smith versus Darcy Kemper, the matchup that we've all been waiting for. And I'm willing to bet Mike Smith was not the happiest man that the Avs ended up winning that Game 6. Just a hunch. But both goaltenders are in a weird spot going into this year's conference finals. For Mike Smith, in 5 games versus Calgary, he posted a .907 save percentage, had that awful, no good first game, but did get better as the series went on and was good enough where the Oilers could get the job done at every single point. As for Darcy Kemper, it was kind of the opposite story. They did win in 6 games, but Kemper was really the one, or at least one of the players, holding back the Avalanche just a little bit, and throughout that series especially was allowing a lot of weak goals that definitely shouldn't go in. If you're allowing bad goals to Tyler Bozak, Connor McDavid is going to have a pretty fun time. And for Kemper, in 6 games versus the Blues, he had an .892 save percentage, simply not good enough. And again, you go to the Oilers offense and you look at that high-powered power play especially, it's going to be a rough time for him. And in terms of actual goals he'd have expected, it's a pretty interesting picture. For Mike Smith, overall this playoffs, he's been pretty good. 5th in the entire league with an 8.28 goals saved above expected. As for Darcy Kemper, he's 22 out of 23 goaltenders in the playoffs this year with a -4.24. So in my opinion, for the Avs, even though they have the advantage in terms of offense, depth, and defense, the goaltending might be the biggest issue. And when you're facing the offense that Edmonton has, you can't afford any mistakes. And Kemper has been allowing way too many, way too soon. So to me, Kemper is really the huge wild card. I give the advantage to the Avs in so many different areas, but if Kemper plays the way he did versus St. Louis, the Avs are going to get exposed, and the Oilers could definitely win this series. As long as you got Connor McDavid, as long as you got Leon Draisaitl, your goaltender needs to be at tip-top form, and I don't have faith that Darcy Kemper is going to be that guy. Is he going to be the consistent goaltender that can get it done in this series? That's the biggest test, and for the Avs as well, staying out of the penalty box is going to be huge. That's obviously a factor for both teams, but when you're facing Edmonton, if the Avs do have advantage in shots in terms of momentum, They can't allow the Oilers to do anything like that, get back in the game whatsoever. They did that way too many times against the Blues and allowed way too many leads to be lost. And in my opinion, when you're fighting against guys like Connor McDavid, when you're fighting against the top end guys, the goalie really is the main factor. Kemper, simply put, needs to be better, and I think he will be in this series. I don't think he's going to be fantastic, but I think he'll kind of be like Mike Smith versus Calgary, where he might allow still a couple of bad goals, but still be good enough to get the job done as long as the Avs play great around him. So even though I give the edge to the Oilers in maybe the power play, that special teams, and the goaltending, I think for Edmonton, that forward depth is just lacking compared to the Avs, and I think rolling out all four of those lines with Colorado is just going to be a tough thing to manage, especially for Jay Woodcroft, and I think the defense could get a little bit tired, especially as it goes further into this series. I could see the Oilers starting up pretty well, but at the same time, it does start in Colorado, so that's going to be a pretty big factor. But I'm going to say in this series, looking at everything right now, the offense, defense, goaltending, and everything, even though I don't have the biggest faith in Darcy Kemper, I still think he's going to be just good enough, just solid enough to get the job done in the series. I will say this, I think it goes 7 games. I think the Oilers are going to push the Avs to their limit. But at the same time, I think Kemper and the Avs defense are going to have a much better Game 7, and the Avalanche will win in 7 games, moving on to the Stanley Cup Final. It won't be easy, but I do think the Oilers are going to push the Avs, but not be able to get it done in the end. But still, for this Oilers team to get to the conference finals and push one of the best teams in the NHL to 7 games, I think will be pretty successful, and especially compared to what McDavid has had to deal with throughout the rest of his career, it's not bad results, I'd say. But I want to know in the comments down below what you guys agree and disagree with my predictions. Who do you guys see winning this series, Avalanche or Oilers? And in how many games do you see it happening as well? I could still see it going either way, and again, I see it going to Game 7, so in my opinion, it's a pretty close one, and especially the goaltending could maybe favor Edmonton a little bit, which could push them over the top. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Make sure you share this video with your friends. Get it out there, subscribe, hit that like button if you haven't, and if you enjoyed today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Have a great day, y'all. Drink some water, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.